Hi guys, and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to talk about whether or not stool testing can be used to diagnose or monitor the progress of Sibo. Now, for those of you who are newbies, Sibo stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So then it begs the question, well, if it's all part of the same tube, can't we just measure the bacteria that are coming out in a stool sample and then ascertain information about what's happening in the small bowel? Well, we'll get into that in just a minute, but I'm going to throw a little bit of shade on my own profession first and say that this is something that's come up really exclusively because of the functional medicine and integrative medicine world. I really haven't seen traditional, conventional GI doctors talking about this much, but I do see patients come in with results where their functional doctor, their integrative doctor, or their naturopath tells them that they think they have Sibo based on some stool testing. So let's get into whether or not this is really something that we can ascertain from stool testing. And let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so the biggest offender for this is going to be the Vibrant America Gut Zoomer stool test. And I'm actually showing you results that I got done in August of last year. So this is not a HIPAA violation. I'm just showing you my own stuff, of which I already did a whole interpretation video for this particular test. But you can see that this particular test from this functional medicine lab, they have a whole section right here that says Sibo. So lo and behold, you can see that they give you a nice little scale, green, yellow, red being obviously bad. And then they're implying very, very strongly that you could deduce the likelihood of your having Sibo based off of this test. Now, if we scroll down a little bit further, I think it was on page 8, then yes, then they have this whole section right here. Hold on, I'm going to make my bubble a little smaller. There we go. So they have this section here on page 8, and similarly, you can see it says gut microbiome and Sibo, and then here they label it as Sibo syndrome. So it's kind of their way of skirting around the fact that they're heavily implying something that is totally, completely false, to kind of give away the point of the video here. But their whole point is that you can supposedly ascertain whether or not you have Sibo or how bad it is based off of this test. Now, I have numerous issues with this particular test of note, but I will say theoretically, if we're going to follow the logic here, the bacteria and the critters that tend to be overgrown in Sibo, in that overgrowth in the small intestine, tend to largely be E. coli, Klebsiella, which I don't see listed here, and Methanobrevibacter if you have methane-dominant Sibo. So they have 2 out of the 3 big guys, and then they have a couple of others like the Enterococcus species, strep, and staph. So there's a couple of other species that they mention here that have been shown in aspirate studies to play a part in the Sibo of it all. So theoretically, I could see why they designed the test this way. Let me go ahead and show you another version that I've seen come out of the offices of functional medicine doctors. This is a sample report from the GI map from Diagnostic Solutions. This is a very commonly used functional stool test. It's decent. It's not my favorite. I have a whole another video on my channel about how to interpret your GI map test results, so that's a story for another day. But this is a sample report. You can see the first page is all pathogens, all bad hombres. That person might have a C. diff issue. This person also apparently has H. pylori. But what usually gets discussed with Sibo specifically in, again, the functional medicine space is that we'll see, all right, Enterococci, particularly these 2 species, can come up in Sibo. Klebsiella is another of the contenders that can come up in Sibo. Occasionally, staph and strep. If you're methane-dominant Sibo, then you're looking at a Methanobrevibacter overgrowth, more than likely. And one more thing up here, this is listed under normal bacteria flora because it is a commensal, but Escherichia species, this would be basically E. coli. And again, E. coli and Klebsiella seem to be the 2 biggest ones that are sucked out of the juice of the small bowel of people with Sibo. So the logic goes that, again, it's all part of the same tube, and this is the bacteria that's coming out in a stool sample. Therefore, maybe this could indicate the overgrowth in the small bowel, right? So if you have an overgrowth, say you had somebody with testing who has an overgrowth of E. coli or Escherichia species in this case, And let's say that person also had an overgrowth of these two enterococci species and maybe Staphylococcus. Would we then tell that person, hey, you have Sibo based off of this? And I'm here to tell you the resounding answer to that question is absolutely not. No, do not use this as a way to judge whether or not you have Sibo. And here's the thing, I'm going to just backpedal for a second. Sibo testing is very imperfect. Breath testing kind of sucks. It gives false negatives and false positives, and there's a lot of error in the way that people do the test or the way that practitioners order the test. There's a lot of resistance to and lack of availability of aspirates, which would be the gold standard, is to just suck the stuff out of the small bowel and see what's in there. So it's very tempting to do a stool test and then gather this information this way, but it just is not something that can be done. Similarly, theoretically here with the GI map, for example, or with the other one, we could theoretically say, if this person also has elevated levels of Candida, then maybe we're going to label them with the diagnosis of SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth. But I'm going to show you a couple of research papers that I think really beautifully demonstrate why this is not something that we can determine based on stool testing. That being said, I'm still a very big fan of stool testing, and it can be incredibly helpful in understanding what you need to do and what direction to take your case. So don't think that I'm anti-stool testing. That is not the case at all. But I have a couple of articles here pulled up. This one, funny enough, the earliest one that I was able to find that really gave the information in a way that I thought was digestible for you guys is this article here about the composition of the microbiota along the intestinal tract in pigs. But nonetheless, I'm going to show you the information I thought was really helpful. And here it is. So here you have this beautiful, oh, hopefully it's not too in the way, schematic, but you can see from here to here, this is small bowel, small intestine, and from here to here is colon, aka large intestine. So the dividing line between small intestine and colon is right about there. And you can see the very, very stark contrast between what is living in your colon versus what is living in the small intestine. Now these, again, this is an animal study, so this is in pigs, but you could get the idea if you look. Proteobacteria, of which many of those Sibo culprit bacteria are in that family, so Klebsiella and E. coli both are going to be in the Proteobacteria phylum. Proteobacteria are, by and large, more abundant in the small intestine than in the colon. Firmicutes bacteria, in this case, seem much more abundant in the small intestine as opposed to the colon. And Bacteroidetes really start to take over and become more or less evenly matched with Firmicutes the further along you go in the colon. Now again, this is an animal study, so let me go ahead and pull up. There was two really good human studies that have similarly helpful visual aids. So this is, again, spatial and temporal analysis of the stomach and small intestinal microbiota in fasted healthy humans. So this is healthy human beings. That is what they're doing here. And let's see. This is a little bit less compelling of a visual. I like the other style of the graph, but I'm going to show it to you anyhow. So similarly, if we look here, they're doing something remarkably similar. So if you look, oh, hold on, let me scroll down. There we go. So in this study, they're looking at, again, healthy humans. And now we have two dividing lines, or three. We have the difference from here to here. That is stomach versus small intestine. Then we're looking at small intestine versus stool. And look at the differences. Look at that. This is a vast array of a rainbow of different colors that you're not even seeing in the other samples. Look at all of these pinks, all of these Firmicutes bacteria and the Vermicutobacteria, Akkermansia. You don't see those at all prior to getting into the stool sample. I mean, not really. I mean, you have a little bit of pink here, maybe a little bit of pink here, but it's a very different story when you get to the stool. Similarly, you can see that Bacteroides here are more represented in the stomach and then not so much in the small intestine here, and that would seem to parallel what we just saw in that animal study before. Proteobacteria, these are again usually going to be the ones that are involved more in the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth situation, like Klebsiella and E. coli. And you can see there's a fair whack of Proteobacteria in the stomach, and they are represented reasonably well in the small bowel, and then really not a lot. You've got a bit of this gold color by the time you get to the stool, but really not a lot of representation for the Proteobacteria either. And then Actinobacteria, these are going to be things like your Bifidobacteria, and you can see that that reddish brownish color, that brick red color, is well represented in stool samples, but not so much in the rest of the ecosystem. So very interesting, I thought. Okay, and now the most recent study is a 2020 study from Dr. Pimentel's group. So this is out of Cedars-Sinai, and this is the reimagined study, or a portion of it, and they have done a really beautiful job at really driving this point home a little bit further. So if we go ahead and scroll down, we will see a chart that is somewhat similar to what we've seen before right here. And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more so you can see. But if you look at what they're giving you here, this information, we have a couple of important dividing lines. So from here to here, we're looking at small intestine. So the duodenum, the jejunum, and the furthest distance that they were able to measure, which sounds like it's probably the latter part of the ileum from what they've been saying in the article. So you're looking at 3 different portions of the small intestine: the portion closest to the stomach, the portion right in the middle, and then the portion of the small intestine that is closest to, but not yet in, the colon. And then finally, they went one step further and they did stool sampling, and they compared the microbiota that were measured in stool as opposed to what is in the small bowel. And you can see that it looks pretty darn different. Now, if you were to really squint at this tiny microscopic print here, it looks like the blue is Firmicutes. So I'll just give that a big old F here. Then the orange is Proteobacteria. Again, Proteobacteria are going to be things like E. coli, Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, a lot of the bacteria that are currently being pinned for Sibo, like when they measure it and they do an aspirate, a lot of the bacteria that they're getting in people with Sibo is in this group. It's in this Proteobacteria group in the orange. And you can see that Proteobacteria are far more represented in the small bowel in a normal situation, as opposed to, it's only going to make up, 1, 2, 3, 4% of the stool microbiota when you look at it in a stool sample. Similarly, if you look here, Bacteroidetes in the green are hardly represented throughout the majority of the small intestine, but then when you get to the stool sample, it's not uncommon to see 30, 40, 50% of the stool sample come out as Bacteroidetes. So that's a huge difference. We're looking at maybe 5% versus 30, 40, 50%. That is a huge, huge difference in what we are detecting in stool sampling versus the small bowel. Similarly, in the orange, we have Vermiculobacteria, and that's going to be the bacteria Akkermansia muciniphila. And you can see that it is hardly represented even by the very latter portion of the small bowel. It's really hardly detected. And then it does show up at a couple percent of the microbiome by the time you get to the stool sample and theoretically to the colon. And then we've got a couple others that change and shift too. We've got Actinobacteria, so that's going to be like your Bifidobacteria, for example, and that's in the purple. You can see that Bifido are more represented in the small bowel and much less so in the stool, in these subjects at least. And then, let's see, which one did we not talk about? And then Fusobacteria, similarly, much more represented in the small bowel, not mucho when you get to the stool sample. So if you think about it, it's kind of like, let me, here, this is like a really low-tech way to do this, but I think it's going to get the point across. All right. So basically, when you do stool testing and you're making a claim, or your practitioner is making a claim, or the lab that they choose to use is making the claim that you can diagnose Sibo, it's kind of like you're looking at only this column, and now you're being asked to draw the other 3 columns on the left side. Good luck. That's all I've got. Good freaking luck. You can't do it. I wouldn't be able to do this, and I do stool testing on all of my patients. I do stool testing on me. I have done stool testing with my husband. Like I do this for a living, and I could not begin to guess what it looks like and draw that conclusion for my patients. And I treat IBS and SIBO and dysbiosis all dang day. So I cannot imagine a scenario where looking at just this far right column and then trying to draw the stuff on the left makes any lick of sense. Similarly, honestly, I mean, we could go the opposite direction. You wouldn't see this in a day-to-day, but theoretically, similarly, we could look at this and say, all right, this is what the small bowel microbiota looks like. Tell me what's going to show up in stool. I don't know. You just have no way of knowing. I mean, I could take a healthy stab at it because, again, I've done stool testing with so many people over the years. So I would probably wager, you know, like looking at this, I'd probably get pretty close and say, 40% Bacteroidetes, just for the heck of it. And I would probably guess, 40% Firmicutes. And I'd get pretty close. But that's more because I've seen the numbers numerous times enough in stool. I'm much more familiar with the stool sampling and seeing what numbers come back on a regular basis on stool sampling. So I have a better predictive ability to interpret that and make a guess that's educated. But as far as like looking at stool and then trying to work backwards to the small bowel, my opinion as of right now in 2021 cannot be done. And I would love to see research that proves otherwise, because it's very tempting to forego the Sibo breath test, forego a test that might not make you feel too great because of the sugar you're ingesting and is going to give false negatives and false positives. Like, I would love for stool testing to be the answer, whether it be the GI map or the gut zoomer, but until proven otherwise, I really cannot see a scenario where this would be a useful thing for Sibo. Now, like I said, you could have dysbiosis of the colon, and that could be somewhat deduced with stool testing, so that's still useful. And whether or not you have Sibo is kind of another layer to that equation of the dysbiosis thing that you're dealing with. But overall, no, the whole answer to this question for this video is no, you cannot deduce whether or not you have Sibo, and you cannot track the progress of Sibo based on stool testing. If somebody tells you otherwise, then they are not keeping up with this research and they're not familiar with the differences in the microbiota along the intestinal tract. And if anybody's watching from Vibrant America, I love you guys. I use some of your other tests. It's lovely, but really, come on now. Like, you need to take the Sibo section off of your dang test, because you're going to lead people astray and you're going to confuse a lot of practitioners and a lot of patients. So my goodness gracious, just take that off. You know, I think this is a little controversial, but I'll say it anyway. In honesty, there is so much competition in the functional medicine lab space. Everybody wants to be the test. Up until a few years ago, Genova had the stool test that every single person used. And then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the GI map came on the scene and they had really great marketing, and everybody, it's like that meme where like the presumably boyfriend and girlfriend are walking together and the boyfriend is like turning and looking at another beautiful woman and the girlfriend is like that's kind of what happened with Genova and the GI map. The GI map came on board, and then all of the functional practitioners got swooned and they all went and they abandoned ship. Well, now every company wants to be the new GI map. Everybody wants to have a couple of extra bells and whistles to convince the functional medicine doctors, hey, you need to use my test, not their test. And that is like, once you get some traction, everybody and their brother is going to run your stuff. The same thing happened with the Dutch test years ago. All of a sudden, out of the blue, everybody is running Dutch tests on every damn patient. And I cannot wrap my head around why, other than just marketing. And, you know, I think that with Vibrant America, honestly, I think that this is kind of like a little bit of a marketing thing. And it's just, they're trying to be a little extra snazzy and a little ahead of the game. And they want to edge out the competitors to a point where they can convince doctors that they need to offer their test instead of another test. It's not a bad test. It has some good redeeming stuff going for it, but I really do think it's dishonest and honestly counterproductive that they put that Sibo section on their test. So again, shout out if you're watching this and you happen to work for Vibrant America. I would love to have a conversation with you guys, but I really do think that that needs to be removed from the testing because it's honestly, it's dishonest. But for those of you at home who are probably not working for that company and you are just normal, everyday people trying to figure out what the heck to do about your gut health, just know stool testing, definitely useful, definitely can be worth your time, but it will not tell you if you have Sibo. End of story. Point blank. Period. I don't know how else to say it. In future videos, we're going to talk more about Sibo and IBS and dysbiosis and everything in between, so stay tuned. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, please like and subscribe if you appreciate this content and you want to follow more. Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe, ring the bell, click the like button, and leave a comment down below with the videos that you would like to see me do next. Doing all of those really helps support the channel and support my efforts in making as many videos as possible for you guys. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.